All right, here we are. I'm Mr. Pike, and I'm continuing on by the Great Horn Spoon. Today's chapter is chapter 10, The Rogue Outrogued. So a rogue is kind of like a word for like an outlaw and someone that tricks people. So it's kind of like the outlaw has been outlawed or the trickster has been out-tricked. Here we go. Page 101 in our books. Praiseworthy remained remarkably calm. That's like his character trait. Jack didn't so much as raise an eyebrow. If you remember in the previous chapter, they just realized Cut-Eye Higgins was on the carriage stage with them. But he did give Jack a faint poke in the ribs with his elbow, as if to say, "Easy, Master Jack, easy. Leave the scoundrel to me." "Small world, ain't it?" grinned Cut-Eye Higgins. His hand remained at rest, in silent warning, on his pistol. "I hadn't noticed it until today," said Praiseworthy. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you were still in Rio." The villain's scarred eye was set at a squint. "Rio was too hot for me, you might say. So I lit out for Panama, crossed the isthmus by bongo boat and muleback. A whole parade of folks is getting to the Pacific that way. And looks like I beat you to California at that. I dare say you had a good map to guide you." The man in the jippy joppa hat barred his yellow teeth in a laugh. "A map? A map? Why, what map is that?" Please follow along in your book. Praiseworthy narrowed his glance. "I bring your regards from the good Dr. Buckbee." "Well now, ain't that neighborly of you?" The stage charged across the valley flats, and the Frenchmen shook handkerchiefs in front of their noses to keep the dust away. Jonas T. Fletcher kept shooting tobacco juice out the window as if the ground were on fire. Jack's hand fell to the horn spoon in his belt. He could almost imagine it was a 4-shooter. That would make Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins sit up and take notice. Why, he'd beg to hand over Dr. Buckbee's gold map. The dueling pistol in his belt would be no match for a 4-shooter. But Praiseworthy didn't seem in the least concerned about the lack of firearms. "Have you met Mr. Fletcher?" he said, tugging at his left glove. "He tells us that he's an undertaker. A man in your line of work, sir, never knows when he'll need the services of a good undertaker." "I didn't get the name," said the Missourian. Higgins." Cut-Eye grinned. "Doc Higgins, dentist." "Well now," smiled the undertaker, "the boys will be glad to have a tooth extractor in the camp." Praiseworthy winked at Jack. The imposter had apparently given up his judgeship. A dentist, was he? Specializing in extracting gold teeth, no doubt. "And now, if you gentlemen will excuse me," said the butler, "I believe I'll catch a nap." Sleep, Jack thought. How could anyone sleep with Mr. Cut-Eye Higgins sitting there? But before the stage had traveled another quarter of a mile, Praiseworthy was napping soundly, and Jack was gazing at the villain, their knees almost touching, and the man in the jippy joppa hat gazing back at him. By late afternoon, they'd reached the brown foothills, and the stage pulled up at a relay station for a change of horses. With the mountains rising at their shoulders, Praiseworthy and Jack stood at the well, refreshing themselves with dippers of cool water. The 4-horse team was being replaced with a team of 6 for the hard climb ahead. "Do you think he's got Dr. B's buck map with him?" Jack whispered. "No doubt about it," said Praiseworthy. "And I'll wager he doesn't take his hand off that dueling pistol, even when he sleeps." "We'll need a shotgun to get the map away from him. A 4-shooter at least." "Lacking one and the other," said the butler. "We'll have to rely on our wits, Master Jack. I have no intention of allowing Dr. Buckbee to be cheated out of his map." Soon they were underway again. The narrow road climbed sharply. Oak trees gave way to shadow-darkened pines. The sun was setting across the valley as if to desert them, and the driver's whip cracked in the air like rifle shots. Inside the wooden coach, the passengers sat knee to knee, as before, and held on against the bumps and ruts of the road. Finally, the stage rounded a bend, and the trail seemed to shoot up like a ladder. "Everybody out!" shouted the driver. "Push, gents, push!" Cut-Eye Higgins didn't take his hand off the pistol for a moment. He pushed with one hand. Slowly, the stagecoach, piled high on top with luggage and supplies, climbed up the road. The driver urged the team on with his whip. "Keep it up, gents, we're gaining." Jack put his shoulder into the coach like the others and dug his shoes into the dirt. Halfway up the hill, it seemed to him the driver must have 6 whips in his hand for all the noise he was making. Suddenly, a window shattered, and then another. And just as suddenly, Jack became aware that it wasn't only the crack of the whip in the air. "Gunshots! Road agents!" the driver yelled. He set the brake and reached for his rifle. "Hold up!" Praiseworthy pushed Jack under the coach. Jonas T. Fletcher had beat him there. Through the spokes of the big wheels, Jack saw a dozen horsemen with red bandanas around their faces. They charged out of the pines. And Cut-Eye Higgins drew his dueling pistol and fired. And he missed. He didn't have a chance to reload. The road agents had them surrounded, their guns and rifles bristling in the twilight. Their leader, a big fellow with holes in his boots, called to the driver, "Throw down your rifle. The rest of you, reach for the sky, or I'll send you there pronto." Jack swallowed hard and came out into the open. Praiseworthy gave him a reassuring glance and didn't seem scared at all. They raised their hands. Cut-Eye Higgins growled to himself, but his arms shot up like the others. "Sorry to interrupt your journey," said the leader. "We'll only detain you for a moment. Boys, hop to it." Two of the outlaws climbed to the top of the stage and threw down their trunks and boxes and carpet bags. The others broke them open to paw through the contents for valuables. Meanwhile, another pair of road agents made quick work of the passengers. They pulled watches and chains off vests and tugged buckskin pouches of gold dust from pockets and belts. Jack tried not to look up at Praiseworthy's white gloves. The outlaws would never think of looking there, would they? "All right, gents," said one of the gang, threw the bandana across his mouth. "Now lower your hands one by one and let's have your rings." He started with the Frenchman and then came to Cut-Eye Higgins. He wore a gold ring with a ruby like a drop of blood. Stolen, no doubt, thought Jack. The rogue is being out-rogued. But it was a small comfort. "Why, I wore this ring since I was just a lad," said Cut-Eye Higgins. "It won't come off." "In that case," the outlaw laughed, "we'll just have to chop off the finger." Cut-Eye Higgins removed the ring in an instant, and the highwayman roared. I don't have a ring," said Jack. "I can see that, boy." The road agent moved on to Praiseworthy. "Well, look here. We got a regular gentleman with gloves on." "Not a gentleman," corrected Praiseworthy. "Merely a butler." "What's that? Never did hear of a butler." Jack's heart began to beat faster. Praiseworthy pulled off his right-hand glove. Their gold dust, their grub stake would soon be exposed. But Praiseworthy seemed unconcerned as could be. "How about the other hand?" growled the outlaw. "Naturally," said Praiseworthy. He pulled the glove off each finger, carefully but casually, and held up his bare hand. The gold dust remained in the fingers of the glove. "No rings, as you can see." And the outlaws moved on. Praiseworthy gave Jack a wink without winking, and very calmly pulled the glove on again. But another big fellow was emptying Praiseworthy's carpet bag in the dirt. Shirts, cufflinks, hairbrush. "Why, looky here," the ruffian chuckled. "A picture. A regular beauty, ain't she?" Jack recognized the tiny type at once. It was Aunt Arabella. He didn't know Praiseworthy had her picture along. When he glanced up, Praiseworthy had gone white with anger. "I'll thank you to return that picture to my carpet bag," he warned, stamping each word out of cold steel. "You don't say. Why, I'll be proud to own a picture like this. I guess I'll just take it along." The rest happened so fast that Jack missed half of it in the blink of an eye. Praiseworthy, in his fury, struck like a lightning bolt, grabbing the ruffian to his feet by the shirt in the front. He slammed his left gloved fist into the man's bandana-covered face. The outlaw hurled back as if he'd been struck with a stick or a cord of wood, and he just lay there. "Why, look at that," said the Undertaker in awe. "Knocked that big feller 15 feet uphill." If his fellow outlaws had held their fire, it was only because they were too startled by the butler's awesome left jab. They were like trees growing from the ground. They stood on, and then their leader seemed to grin behind his bandana. "Well, I'd take my hat off to you," he said, "but it ain't fitting for a man in my line of work. That was something to see. Boys, lift our fallen friend across his saddle and we'll be going." Jack gazed up at Praiseworthy with fresh admiration. The butler had never let on that he was so handy with his fists. The truth of the matter was that Praiseworthy had been as surprised as the others to see the brute go flying, and then he remembered the heavy gold dust packed in the fingertips of the glove. It was exactly as heavy as lead, and with his fingers clenched around it, his fist had the kick of a mule. He picked up Aunt Arabella's picture and dusted it off. It seemed curious to Jack that he'd brought it along. It made him feel strangely closer to Praiseworthy than ever before. "One more thing," said the gang leader. "All you gents, take off your coats and drop them in a pile." The guns came up again, and that left no room for argument. Jonas T. Fletcher peeled off his frock coat. Cut-Eye Higgins dropped his dusty linen coat. Regretfully, Praiseworthy added his fine black coat to the pile. He would miss it. "Never met an immigrant yet," said the leader, "who didn't have gold pieces sewed up in the linen of his coat. You won't need coats in this heat, gents, so we'll just take 'em along." An instant later, the highwaymen spurred their horses and carried away their loot and watches and rings and buckskin gold pouches and coats. Praiseworthy, unaccustomed to mere shirt sleeves, stood in the dust like a leopard suddenly deprived of his spots. "Wait till the boys hear about this," said the Undertaker. 15 feet uphill." Praiseworthy moved past him to step in front of Cut-Eye Higgins. "I'll thank you, sir, to hand over Dr. Buckbee's map." The dispirited villain reached for his dueling pistol, and Jack stopped in his tracks. Was Praiseworthy trying to get himself killed? "Don't bother to draw your gun," said the butler. "I was careful to notice that you never reloaded it. The map, sir. The map." The other man stared at him out of the scarred eye and then began to chuckle. But to Jack, it sounded much like a growl as a chuckle. "You're a little late," said Cut-Eye Higgins. "Late? The map was sewn up in the linen of my coat." Now that was one of my favorite chapters. And yet another chapter coming up tomorrow will be chapter 11, Jamocha Jack. I hope you enjoyed the reading of The Great Horn Spoon.